2. Tim, this is episode 50. Can you believe we got here at this time?
I can't believe it. And we did it in a year. That, both of those are pretty big. We can think 50 shows and we'll get them done, but we got them done within a year, which is amazing.
Exactly. And the material that we have now to be able to collect from, to be able to put our collective wisdom out in different areas, it will be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. We've created an archive of great knowledge. So what are we doing today? What do we want to talk about with this new breakthrough?
Well, I think, we had a lot of fun last year developing some of the people aspects, and we sort of kicked off this year with the human-centeredness of project management. I think I want to keep going on that line, and I want to keep going on that line with your okay to see how perhaps PMBOK, the latest project management body of knowledge from Project Management Institute, is now kind of steering a little bit away from process. Not giving up on process, certainly, but certainly bringing in some of those human-centered factors in what we do as project managers. Does that sound good?
Sounds wonderful. So how do you expect us to do that discussion today?
I have no idea, but let's go. So here's what I was thinking, because I was fascinated. I haven't been into the PMBOK 7 as much as I probably need to be, but I'm getting there. And I was just kind of scanning some different areas. And I thought, well, this is an interesting take on this. And it reminded me years and years and years ago when I broke into project management. I've always been in IT, but when I began project management, you probably remember this. It was the wild, wild west of design and development and implementation.
Oh, yeah.
Where we as IT people kind of had our way with the way we wanted things to be. And so therefore we just did, right? So at some point, I remember being pulled in as a young project manager into a peer review of one of my colleagues in terms of how she was managing and delivering projects. Well, I had been taught in school and had been doing a lot of reading on something called structured analysis, structured design, structured programming, basically a structured approach to managing projects. And I remember doing the peer review, and I thought I was nice about it, but apparently she didn't like being called out for her Wild West ways of managing projects. And I heard about it. And so as I thought back then, the change from kind of chaos to structured process, how now we've come from a very structured, very process-oriented approach to now kind of a different perspective on project management that is basically being outlined a lot in PMBOK 7 in the latest version. So I thought we'd start there.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I do have some questions and comments though, but let's get going here. So I have some reactions myself to this. I was right there when they launched it on the second day. I think I pulled it down and I started looking at it and I started putting two and two together and it started making sense to me. But what was it about the 7th edition when you first opened? What was your first reaction?
I think the first reaction was first of all, the audience is much broader. I looked at that, and the audience is kind of anyone and anybody who has anything to do with managing and delivering projects. That was the first clue.
Yeah, wasn't that an amazing statement? That was not just like, oh, that's what they're talking about. No, they go out and they're bold about saying that. This is not a project manager's document. This is a project participant's document.
Well, and what caught my eye was, if you've read any of my blogs, I sort of did some table pounding on how it is that we as IT professionals leave the stakeholders out a lot. And I just felt that we needed to get them much more involved in what we do. And so I was happy to see that they are, I think, the first one listed, I think, if I recall, in that in the audience for the new PMBOK 7.
Now, I had a bit of similar response. I've been observing this, and I actually got a really good dose of human-centeredness in both my undergraduate and graduate school throughout the mid to late 90s to the early 2000s. And they got me indoctrinated into, leadership, 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 servant leadership. And by that time, Peter Drucker was retired, but he was starting to talk away from management to leadership, and it was starting to resonate with the early adopters. And when I first saw the talent triangle came out in 2015, when PMI made that statement, we can't just talk about process, we have to talk about leadership, we got to talk about business, and we can start making sense. And I said, now we're talking. And then when they added in the 6th edition, Agile, I was saying, wow. And now with the 7th edition, they took both Agile and Predictee out. Now, they've left a lot of the tools, but that's what's interesting. And it's all about behavior, and it's all about principle, and it's all about people. So I came to the same conclusion you did.
But let me give you a little twist on that conclusion. The reason I started with that particular story, the reason it kind of came to me in terms of my early experience moving from the wild west of project management to a more structured approach, by now going into this more sort of tailoring version, the much more thought process around human-centeredness, as you mentioned, do you think we're going to now allow project managers to sort of put process behind and go back to wild west of managing projects?
Oh, no. that is out of the bottle. That genie's out of the bottle. First of all, stakeholders are going to still want the triple constraint. Yep, I want it cheap, I want it now, and I want it fancy. And we're still going to have to do that. And so the way we set expectations is we quantify, measure, and we validate, and we help them balance constraints. And that's what our job is. Now, it does allow us to emphasize a lot more on facilitation and training and helping people understand. And delegation is a big topic too, where we can actually offload a lot of these more tactical things and help people who are coming up in their careers. This shows up both in PMI's PMBOK and in their training material, so that we can focus on more of these executive functions, which only stand good for the career of the project manager.
Well, and what's interesting, before PMBOK 7, before PMBOK 6 even, I had the pleasure, or I should say the privilege, of consulting to end user organizations. And one of the things that I elaborated to them, to the end user, when we brought this system integrator on board, it was, I mean, we're talking $100 million projects and higher. Mm-hmm. I educated the end user executive in terms of how it is that they must work with the system integrator to get the most out of the system integrator and to hold their feet to the fire. And therefore, they needed to understand some of the process, but more importantly, they needed to ensure that the system integrator treated them in a human-centric approach rather than try to befuddle them with all of their terminology and technology.
And see, that's what was wonderful with the fifth going to the 6th edition, the emphasis on servant leadership. And now it's getting even louder, because before we were talking about this formally and in standards, it's like servant leadership. Oh, that's this year's flavor, and Agile has that. That's an Agile thing. I don't have to worry about that. I'm predictive. Yeah. And it's like, these are tools that span frameworks, and they span methodologies. So let's use them where they're effective. Let's not use them where we think we can have visibility.
Well, and how many conversations have you and I had over the last year in terms of project managers treating their, not just their teams, but their client teams as respected human beings who are all there to do the job together. So yeah, I think I'm really welcoming this new edition.
You know, it clicked with me I guess it clicked with me back when I was just starting in consulting. And one of my mentors who wrote the consulting book we were using in class said, guys, it's not your deliverable. It's not your project.
Yeah.
It's not yours. They have to live with their decisions. So why shouldn't it be their decisions? And guys, sometimes they don't know what the responsibility of making decisions are. So you as consultants must be at the service of them, not just to help them with their role, but help them how, like what you said, get the most out of their role.
Well, and if you think about it, anything, we've had, my wife and I have had a couple houses built for us. The contractor that I worked with never expected me to understand, load bearing walls and all of these. They never expected that. What they wanted to know was what I needed to be able to go in when they're finished and live in that house that pleased me. And I don't see any difference why we as IT professionals can't take that same attitude with our clients.
Exactly. That's beautiful. Well stated. Well stated. So this leads us. This PMBOK 7. Is it primarily an Agile book or is it primarily a Predictee book? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and again, I'm confessing, as I mentioned before, I haven't been into it that deeply, but what I have seen of it, I don't think it matters. I think it's both, because when you look at, for example, I think I read something about there's 12 principles, and I read through those 12 principles. You can call it Agile, you can call it predictive, you can call it, it's anything you want. Those 12 principles apply. So I think, this is my humble opinion, but I think the newest version of PMBOK is well done, and it serves any kind of IT delivery.
Yeah, if you dig into the introduction of the guide, it says, they took out a lot of the predictive modeling in the 6th edition. They put it in a knowledge base called PMI Standards Plus. It's still there. It's still accessible. By the way, the 6th edition is going away. It's not going to impact anything because the data is still there in knowledge base and we can still have it. And what the authors of the 7th edition say is, this is just a different mindset. This is just a different approach. And this whole thing we call predictive is still appropriate and good for certain projects. But what we're doing is we're giving you a totally different way of looking at projects that's just as effective in many other situations. And you should be thanking us for opening up an opportunity to grow even further.
So if I'm a young project manager listening to Tim and Merv right now, and I just heard you, Tim, say that the PMBOK 6 is going away. Well, it's not really going away. It's just being put into the standards. Is it standards or standards plus into the
knowledge base? Yeah.
The knowledge base. Yeah. So what does that do for me studying for my PMP exam? Is that messing me up?
It absolutely changes nothing.
Oh, okay, good.
Now, here's why. Because the PMBOK is just one of many references. Secondly, the exam is built not around the PMBOK, it's built around the exam content outline. So here's how you need to think about this, okay? You have the 6th edition, which are what you call the rules and tools and all that, right? The process that, here are the tinker toys that you put together for a project, for project management controls. And then over here, you have the PMBOK 7, which says, this is the attitude you need to approach this work with. This is the behavior. These are the principles. This is that I'm not going to call it soft skills, but this is the mindset you need. And it doesn't matter whether it's predictive or agile. And the exam content outline says, okay, now what does a project manager do in the middle of all this mess? And that's what the exam content outline says. These are the tasks a project manager performs in their duties inside that. And that's what the exam tests show.
Oh,
and that's not going to change for a couple of years.
Yeah. So do you think the future exams then will be much more towards oriented much more towards the mindset aspect, or will there still be process oriented questions on the exam?
They're going to be process oriented, but from what's happened in the last year, they changed the exam, by the way, January of 2021. And from hundreds of students I talked to who passed the exam, there's about 10 or 11 math problems. You can solve them logically. You don't have to memorize those 17 to 19 formulas. It's and that's what the exam content outline says. And this is what I tell my students: you don't memorize your way to a passing grade. What the exam talks about is, yeah, you can solve the math logically, and you should be able to if you're a proper manager. Look at this data. Look at this data. You can say, oh, I can actually take from these different type of data this information, right? And the exam asks you two things. Number one, what do the results mean? So it's going to ask you to interpret. Like, for instance, we spent $5,000 last week. Good. What does that mean? It means nothing. It's data, right? But when you calculate that against your plan or against your velocity, you're saying, oh, that means we spent $500 too much this week. Now, that's actionable. Okay. And that's what the exam's looking for. What does this mean? How do I interpret the results to be able to make proper decisions? And the final thing the exam tests on is, what do you do now? It's 80% of the questions are still behavioral, and it's just even more so. And they're tricky because a lot of them require not just, process of elimination or match the definition with the context. They're getting into root cause analysis and all of these other advanced tools that you have to use. It rather is an interesting exam.
Well, and one of my complaints, and I don't want to come across like I'm skeptical about things or whatever, but I remember one of my complaints early on for the PMP process was those who were good at exam taking, i.e. good memorizers, good studiers, could pass the exam and put them in a project situation. I would not. I would not put them in a project situation.
You would really appreciate my approach to preparing people for the exam, because it requires not acquisition of knowledge. That's low level. That's step 1 or 2. We're up in step 4 and 5, where we're looking at changing your mindset and changing your approach, because we have to talk about things like ethics. We have to talk about things like balancing constraints. And like you're saying, we have to have the stakeholder and the sponsor and the team and everybody else. We have to understand all of these things and then figure that out. And the exam questions do that. They're not hard. And it's not that they're tricky. You can't learn a trick. Yeah. It's like going back into Star Trek. It's the Kobayashi Maru. You're going to crash the ship, but crashing the ship or not is not a significant win or lose. It's how you go down with the ship and the decisions and the action you make going down with it.
And yet I still find in organizations that I consult with, those people who want their checklists, who criticize their system integrator because they didn't do something correctly according to some formula in their heads, right? Not even spelled out, but it's, and I want to sit back and go, wait a minute, you hired these people on in my case, a lot of these are fixed price contracts, and yet you want them to turn timesheets into you. Like, that's going to change whatever it is you do, it's going to change. I don't care if the SI works 1,000 hours a week or 2,000 hours a week, as long as they're delivering to my expectations and to quality, right?
Yeah, it's the first rule of emotional intelligence. Humans are going to do human.
Yes.
They're going to do that, and we cannot change them. But you know what? That's all right. We've been battling this for 6,000 years in Western civilization. This is just the way a lot of people think. I need that measurement. Now, measurement is good for a lot of things, but in projects where you're in the unknown or things are growing and changing, that's where you have to say, okay, if we're talking about change, we're not just talking about deliverable change. We're talking about schedule change, scope change. And if you're going to pile a bunch of things on top of this donkey that I have beside me, guess what? If you put too many things there, you're going to have to buy me another donkey. You have no choice.
But Tim, if I don't have my checklist, I don't know. That means I have to think.
That's right.
That means I have to.
And thinking is hard.
It is hard.
I'm just studying right now what's called solitude. We're actually going back about 500 to 700 years, especially with this whole pandemic and lockdown, and we've had to entertain ourselves. Yeah, we can do Netflix so long, but a lot of us have gone back to the old classics, and they're saying, you know what? These guys were pretty smart. And if you can have the world shut up and just think hard, it's amazing. And the problem is we don't even know the breadth and length of our ability to put ideas together and create new ideas. And I found in my classes, the ones that you say, I need that brass ring and that brass ring will get me to pass. And that's all. Just give me the brass ring, Tim. Give me the brass ring, right? Well, if you can actually say it's not a brass ring, it's picking that brass ring up so many times you build muscles. Now, about 10% of the people who go through the exercise get it. And I call that a severe win.
Well, I remember when I took I can't remember which exam it was, but when I qualified for my taking the MBA, MCAT, no, I forget, whatever it was anyway. But I remember in that situation, and I had trained myself over the years that education was a thinking process, not a memorization process. And I remember getting back the parts where you had to write out your answers and logically define or describe something. I got 99th percentile in those areas. In the questions that I had to kind of, the ones you'd study for to get exactly correct based on what you're going to select from the correct answers, I didn't do as well in those things. And so I determined that the people who did better on and I determined this because I did this, because the people who did better on the thinking, the logic, actually ended up managing projects better because they thought through the problem. They didn't resort to some formula or some checklist or something in some process diagram that said you have to do it this way, period.
You know what's funny? It blows my mind because I was deep into rabbit holes these last 2 years. Like I said, I was studying solitude, but I was also studying neuroplasticity and how we learn and how to change your habits. And I'm still in there. And they are saying exactly what you're saying. It's frightening. That, this common sense attitude we have, number one, is not common, but number two is something that the human brain does. And if we can actually understand it, we can unleash such incredible power.
Well, and you had asked the question before in terms of is the 7th edition of the PMBOK Agile or predictive or both or whatever. And I think we both came to the same conclusion that it's it's for everything. But I think what I liked about the fact, I went into a chapter called models, methods, and artifacts, or something like that.
Oh, yes. What did you think of those?
Well, I was reading through and I go, I haven't seen this in writing since I took an organizational behavior class for my MBA, and bringing all of this information forward to a project manager who by now is steeped in what you call rules and tools, what I call arts and charts. This has to be a mindset change.
Oh man. Oh, I I put people through existential crises in my class because this is what we're doing. And I flipped out when I was looking over at models, right? The thinking strategies, they said, here's McClellan. Going,
Yeah.
oh dear, they're bringing that up again. Good, because it reminds us that we have all these things. I'm actually referencing something called Bloom's taxonomy in class, which isn't referenced in the PMBOK, but is still an effective model on how we learn and how we acquire knowledge. And so when I looked at that, it was exciting. And the methods too, those 19 analytical methods, that the tools and techniques, they didn't go away.
Yeah.
Those were transportable, and they have a great section under the methods that talk about many of those. And then the artifacts are your project documents and your templates, that kind of thing. So it's almost like they said, okay, we're not talking about putting a map in front of you. We're not talking about carrying a trailer with a bunch of things to build a house. What we're doing is we're giving you the tools, so when you find the perfect place to build the house, you have the tools to create the tools to build the house, no matter what house it is, no matter what environment it is. But you're right, Merv, it takes thinking.
Well, when I looked at the one I was going to argue with was there was one on motivational or something, but and I thought, no, we've talked about this. You can't motivate. You can only put perspective into place for people to motivate themselves. Well, it turns out when I read deeper, that's kind of what they were getting at, is that you put the tools in place for people to be motivated, but you as project manager need to be the catalyst for putting those tools in place.
Yes. And that's the beautiful thing. Both the training material and the PMBOK are very good at communicating what servant leadership is, service. And the sacrificial aspect, I appreciated putting that in, because value is not just something I hold in high regard. It's something I'm willing to sacrifice for. And second of all, that catalyst thing is really important. We're not the flame.
No.
We actually allow the flame to occur. We deserve a styrofoam cup, right? But we're the ash. It's like, here's the sugar cube, you're the ash, you rub the ash on the sugar cube. It's not your flame, it's the sugar cube's flame. But without you, the sugar cube could not attain its ability.
So I'm going to go back over this podcast and count the number of analogies you come up with. Sugar cubes and flames and all of those things.
Yeah, I'm pulling out all my magic tricks in my class today, I guess.
but when I was what you had said though, you mentioned that there's a key word in there, value.
Yes.
If we as project managers can't bring value to our customer through the way that we manage the project, through the way we manage the process, more importantly, through the way we lead our people, and I'm not even going to say manage, I'm going to say lead our people. And I even hate to say our people. Lead the team that was given to us. How's that? When we learn to do that and provide value, that's what we're in it for. Well, anything else is just a paycheck.
Yeah. And I didn't really understand the role of value, even when I had my PMP. It wasn't until I was working with a CXO of a Fortune 50. And he and I were working on what was it? We were working on a data center model, a financial analysis. And he said, great numbers, Tim. You're giving me a 46% return on investment in the next 20 years for this data center consolidation. He said, okay, now tell me, what are the tests and what are the inspections that you're going to do to demonstrate that 46%? And how are you going to hand that value over at the end? So when I have that deliverable does not provide a function, it delivers value. And all my hours and classes in my business school had no meaning. And this guy was able to articulate it in 3 minutes.
Well, and think about that. the people who write the textbooks who have never been in industry, smart people, great theory, but have they ever put some of those into practice? I found the same thing. Even
Wow.
even doing my MBA, I had professors tell me this is the way things are. I went in to try to implement those ideas, and that's not the way things were.
And you know what's funny, Merv? There's a secret even behind that secret. The real secret is you do it about 20 times before you start doing it right.
Yeah.
And that's
and before you do it right one time,
yeah.
because the next time it changes again, right? Because people change, process changes, whatever. So
and that's when you really understand, you know, your whole, we're talking about a mindset change. We're talking about paradigm shift. Oh, that's what they mean by mistake.
yeah.
I'm not getting it wrong. I'm just making a mistake. And the whole idea that this is not intended to get a perfect score. You know, getting an A+ on the PMP is just like getting a C-, first of all. Second of all, it's like you can't really turn a 90-degree turn out of a test and expect that you're going to perform at another level. And so this is a really big shocker for people. And so I've used this classroom experience for them to not just teach them about PMP and getting through the exam and learning project management, but how to actually take these ego hits when you have these crises of existence, because there are a lot of them, aren't there?
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. And I find I'm finding even now people who have been steeped in the process, they might have come out of a certain organization who did things this way or that way, and they show up in another organization and suddenly they find out that that's not the only way to do it. And it really sends them for a loop, because suddenly they find themselves like a fish out of water almost, in terms of where do I go from here? What do I do?
You guys are doing it wrong because you don't have a feasibility analysis.
Yeah.
No, you guys are doing it wrong because you don't have a business case. Well, guess what?
You're doing it wrong because you don't have a cost benefit analysis that has 3 separate ways of looking at it.
They're all the same. They're all the same. And that's the beautiful thing. We're both lucky. You and I are both lucky because we were transported as project managers across multiple industries and across multiple sectors, and working with thousands, tens of thousands of different people who were experts. And we've seen the range of what projects and project management can be. So when we look at the PMBOK, it's like, oh, okay, that's good practice. That doesn't mean it's rules and laws. It means it's a good way to approach it. And a good way to approach it, according to 7th edition, is put people first. Yeah, I can hang with that.
Well, I can too, because Tim, do you remember the name of my company?
Yes.
People First Project Management is the name of my company.
Exactly.
But I was thinking too, and when you're saying that, is that how often have we also come across the fact that just learning these from different folks, like as you were saying, and the fact that you and I grew up in consulting much more than perhaps inside an organization. So we got to see, we had the benefit of many different client types. And what I discovered from all of that was I learned the things that are now in PMBOK 7. And I just wish I could start my career over again with PMBOK 7 as the starting point.
Well, look at this. Value and the delivery of value from the charter to the transition, oversight and coordination, maintaining governance.
So stop right there. So value, how I grew up, value was what I, as the company providing the services, would get.
Exactly.
Yeah. What was the second one you said?
It was oversight and coordination.
Yeah, to the companies that I worked for in my early days, it was how we ran the project.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so it truly is a mind shift. Sorry, I interrupted you.
And maintenance and governance, right? And
Yeah,
again, it's the same thing. It's not my governance.
exactly.
I'm helping you get through your governance in the easiest way possible.
Yeah.
And project environment too. This is one of the things that's interesting. I one of my series of books I read in the last 6 months were cultural and cultural adoption, enhancement of your cultural sensitivity for the business professional. And you have to be aware, and this speaks to your strength too, that even when you're walking inside of a corporation, you don't know the rules.
That's
You
true.
are a guest. And so you're going to speak their language, you're going to eat their food, you're
Yeah.
going to behave as they do. And that's the way you're going to be able to get more work, but that's also the way you're going to be more successful.
Well, I had the good fortune last night to be in a session with, I would say, probably one of the leading world experts on what's called the trust factor. And just the way he explained the whole idea of how, when you begin to develop the trust, how many of the things that cause problems in organizations begin to go away. And he explained this whole situation. And I couldn't help but thinking, in project management, that's been, whenever I've had greatest success, it's when I've built the highest amount of trust with my clients. And I think the PMBOK 7, the latest, and I shouldn't refer to this like it's some sort of exotic Bible or something for what we do, but the fact that it has incorporated some of that human-centered wisdom, such that if we kind of follow the principles, look to some of the guidance that it provides, we end up in a trust situation with those we serve.
Isn't that amazing? And with trust, you don't have to have all of those controls in place. You can actually balance things in a broader influence than you could have just by yourself. It's one of those magical aha moments when you realize the role of trust. That's great. That's great.
So what does all this mean? Again, I'm going to take it back to our young practitioners. All of those neat formulas that we use, and all of the, we may need them, or we used to need them for the exam, but all of the, do those go away?
No. And again, think about it this way, okay? Those pesky millennials, right? They didn't memorize all the formulas. They have the internet there. So
Right.
what are they doing? They're doing problem solving, and they have a toolkit full of formulas they can pull up when they need them. They have Wikipedia. That's cheating. No, that means that they're delegating their research to Wikipedia so they can focus on things they consider more important. And boy, isn't that a lesson for us as project managers?
It's a lesson, yes, but have those same individuals who are going to the internet or to Wikipedia for their formulas, are they understanding how to apply those formulas?
See, that's the thing. And this is where I really emphasize the role of mentorship and the self-development as a continuing process. It's not just being able to look up and say, gee, aren't I smart? But it's the ability of taking that and applying it. Yeah, we may have to have a discussion in future shows. There's a model that says, yeah, I recognize this, and that makes sense. I remember it. I saw it before. What does that mean for comprehension? But comprehending it may not mean application. An application may not mean that you can take it apart and put it back together and create new things out of it. And so there are different levels of, I know this, that I think we could stand to explore it. And I think our audience would really be able to take great advantage of.
Oh, I agree. I remember when I was a young project manager, introduced to the concept of estimate to complete. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's a nice formula. I'll work with my staff to give me estimate to complete each week, and I can kind of forecast for my boss. I never tied it to the greater goal of a consulting organization, and that is how they recognized revenue. And so,
Yes.
and so until someone pointed out to me that it wasn't just a mathematical objective that I did every single week, but it actually had a purpose. And part of that purpose was to be able to pay me my salary, and that's the whole thing, is we can learn how to do all of these formulas, but unless we can apply them intelligently to what it is we're doing on a project, that's the goal. That's the understanding. What are these formulas? What's a burn down chart really telling me?
I'm trying an experiment in my classes. I'm running my classes as a project, okay? Believe it or not, I'm running my classes as an Agile project. And I'm using 2 complete performance index as my metric, because one of our objectives is to run out of time at the same time we run out of slides. And that's my TCPI, right? And I want to stay on budget, the whole thing. And that's what the complete performance index says. Can I get home and run out of gas at the same time I pull into the garage, right? That's basically what it means. Now, they understand the concept in 2 days. And when they get to the formula, they freak out. And they say, oh, that was one of the ugliest formulas that you can approach. It's like, no, it's all these formulas, all these fancy things that we think are scary are all common sense. And they're founded on things that are easy to apply and easy to understand.
And they have to be easy to understand, because there's a lot of times we end up in a situation where we're then explaining it to our clients who are they're steeped in their own formulas that we don't understand, but we can't expect them to understand all of this nitty gritty, when really all they need to know is, what's the quality you're giving me? When are you going to deliver it? And will it serve the goals and the objectives that we set out for that project?
Exactly. And the training material and the exam are actually reflecting that more. That's the interpretation. What does this mean?
Yeah.
And if I can interpret it the way the exam says, I know it enough that I can turn around and teach my team that, and my team can turn around and teach the stakeholders that, and we're all saying the same thing. It's not just repeating words. It's actually replacing that repeating of words with a shared understanding.
Well, and in my practice, I've I've kind of honed in on this whole idea of the understanding, the explanation to my clients, such that they get the most out of what it is that I do for them. But how long do you think it'll take, now that we have this mindset much more delivered in the PMBOK 7? How long do you think it'll take before we can start to change minds out there in industry, so that we see this happening on projects as we go forward?
Okay, let me give you a couple data points, and then I'll let you and our audience toy with this idea, because I've thought about it too. First of all, 6,000 years ago, we had guys.
When the Apple IIe was in place, is that what you mean?
Yeah, really. We had these guys like Zeno and Aristotle and Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus, and they were saying, don't hurt the beehive. If you're a bee, don't hurt the beehive. And we didn't learn anything from that for 2,000, 4,000 years. Okay, that's one thing, right? Now, Herbert Maslow, okay? You know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Okay, he said that we progress through these needs, and the highest one is self-actualization, finding purpose in our lives. And when he published his material, he said, from my data, it seems that about 1% of all the people in the United States that I've surveyed are actually either in the process of self-actualization or are self-actualized. Now, it seems like we're a little bit more above 1% right now. Number one, the information is more available. Number two, we have more time to sit back and think about these things.
Yeah.
And so I think, and I don't propose this yet, I'm still thinking about it, that we're actually looking at an accelerated curve here. I can't tell you when, but I think that it's going to be sooner than we think. Maybe I don't even want to throw out numbers. It's going to be a fairy number.
Maybe in our lifetime.
I think that this is actually going to be integrated into how we train our younger students before they find their vocations.
No,
I think we'll see it in high school and universities easily.
No, I totally agree with that. And I was going to say, that's a pretty bold statement you're making there, considering that most, and when I say most, I mean a higher percentage, I don't know what that percentage is, of people who complete their university education never read another book after they've set down their last book to get their
mercy.
So, if these people don't want to continue their education, I'm not sure how they will ever reach any sort of self-actualization.
Well, and it warmed my heart when my son, when he was in middle school and high school, he was coming back home after class, and it was obvious that the teacher was not giving them answers. The teacher was giving them tools and forcing them to try to come up with their own answers and not making them wrong in class. And those are highlights of, that's indicators that you're being taught by a leader.
Well, and it's also, that bodes well for our industry because I don't know how many projects I have conducted in my career, but not a single one of them has been the same.
Right.
Even when we're implementing the same software or the same business type projects, not a single one is the same. The people change, the culture changes. I've done projects at the state level. Believe it or not, the state of Michigan is different than the state of Florida, is different than the state of Hawaii. And when you do those projects, not one single thing is a cookie cutter. So therefore you need to use your mind, change your mindset. And what was that word in the PMBOK? Tailor your approach to every situation.
And let's actually apply some super cycles on top of what you're saying. Okay. The transition from post-industrialization to the information age. We all humans on Earth have to go from tool users to knowledge users, from tool workers to knowledge workers. And that takes this same paradigm shift. Number two, we're under great strain in our economy and our political environment, and we're questioning everything. And that means everybody needs to be able to use this same type of knowledgeable approach to just keep their feet under them. And number three, things are getting crazy. We're having things that came up 2,200 years ago, like pandemics, and we're seeing more volcanoes, and we're seeing great fluctuation in weather, and we don't know how we're going to handle this. And projects, it's going to be project work that's going to handle these emergency situations, and not just projects and project management, but basically, stability of my personal life, stability of my community, stability of my work. All of that's going to rely on everybody working together. And that's management plus leadership.
Yeah, you reminded me again of my childhood. I happen to be fortunate growing up with my grandfather farming, my father farming. I did not follow in their footsteps. But my father would tell me stories about how my grandfather cleared his land and then would plow it and would plant his crops and would harvest. And it was very, as you were saying, very industrial aged, very labor intensive. Now, when I go back to the family farm, many of the family farms, the small ones, aren't there anymore. They've been absorbed into these large conglomerates. And one of our neighbors who grew up as a young boy next to next to us, my younger brother's best friend. He's like the CEO of a huge corporation where he has to literally, as you said, the information age, he has to understand crop rotation. He has to understand how the markets are working. He has to try to forecast the weather as best he can. And it's not Farmer's Almanac. There's a scientific approach. He has to understand how his machinery runs, how to use the right amount of fuel, how to order the right amount of fertilizer. It's a huge problem compared to what my grandfather did to farm the same exact piece of soil. It's amazing how we've moved from that industrial age to the information age.
Yeah, it's frightening. And this is the business context within which projects exist. And if we're not ready for it, we are going to be made irrelevant. This is irrelevance. Irrelevance is not you don't know a skill. Irrelevance is you don't step up and take action and make mistakes. That's what irrelevance is meaning. And that's what the PMBOK 7 is saying. If you want to be relevant, here's a mindset that's worked really well. And by the way, we have a track record of 2,000 to 6,000 years of some of these skills that are really good. Yeah. And we've forgotten them along the way. So let's pull them up.
So when I asked you that question a lot about how long do you think it'll be before some of these mindset orientations come into being in our careers, in our project management careers, that was the question behind the question, which is more like this: is what is this really saying about the changing role of the project manager?
Oh boy, yeah. And again, I like the idea that Buckminster Fuller mapped out, which is we're not following a map. We're basically, at the end of the day, we're looking at the weather and the clouds and the stars and the waves of the ocean, and we're continually course correcting. And businesses are doing this, nations are doing this, communities are doing this, and therefore projects must be ready to do it for it as well, because all of these changing things happening around us. We can't call closing a project early a failure. It doesn't work that way, right? Yeah. Returning value back to the organization that was value that was not misspent. That's success. And so we have to actually have a different, like I said, a different approach and mindset. And I think the PMBOK 7 is a great pivot. It is disruptive right now, and it's going to be disruptive. And I would like to see what it looks like in the next 5 to 10 years.
And I think it's going to take some of our younger project managers to be able to bring this into their own experience, so that as they become executives within their own organizations, they can begin to spread the word throughout their organization. Because until we experience it, let's face it, people who are steeped in the old ways of doing things and don't want to change won't change. And we're going to get the same results we've always gotten. Is what was my last number? It was well over 50% of projects that fail. And when I say fail, that means they don't come in on time, they don't come in on budget, or they fail ultimately where they're just scrapped altogether. Still over 50%. And I think a lot of that has to do with this inability to shift and to tailor our approach to develop this more human-centered approach to project management.
Yeah. And I really think that organizations see this as a survival mechanism. It's very obvious in other models that have shown that they're ineffective after use for 3 decades. Business throws them away. So if business is able to do that to survive, as human beings, we should actually take that same approach. I'm not saying throw Predictee away. I agree with you. They're incredible tools. And what we can do is, with this new mindset, go back to those tools and say, oh, that's the purpose. Oh, that's why that's valuable. Mm-hmm. And then we use them from the value perspective, not from it's the law, it has to be used perspective.
Well, and even the whole predictive approach, you still need to satisfy the CEO of the corporation who is responsible to his or her shareholders for profitability, they still have to be told what the cost of this is going to be. And part of, whether you use Agile or predictive, part of the predictive model, part of even the Agile model should be that I can come in within the budget that I told him or her I would come in at.
Yeah.
I have to be able to do that much, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That there has to be some level of confidence. Now, here's the question. If I were one of these new project managers thinking about, wow, this is a real change, how would you tell them how to prepare for this different type of project management? Not just read the PMBOK 7, but how would you tell them to prepare?
I think we've probably explored this in the past. And by the way, I was going to ask this question of you at the same time. So good, like minds think alike, right? So and I put myself into a 20-year ago project manager, fairly new, fairly not understanding of all the nuances. For me, it would be, yes, read the PMBOK, just to kind of get a feeling for what all of this means. But I would find a mentor who understands what it means to manage projects from a human-centered approach. And I would pick that person's mind every chance I got. I mean, I would have a weekly luncheon with that person, or ask to sit in the back of some of the meetings he or she runs. Anything I could do to be mentored with that kind of attitude and that kind of mindset would help me approach and then put myself into situations where I try different things. The best situations are those with clients. Teammates are expected to kind of follow their project, or they don't get a paycheck, but the clients don't have to follow. What can I do to help my clients follow me or follow my team in a way that's successful for them?
Yeah, and again, it's the same advice I've always given on leadership too. Before you can actually teach other people to lead, you have the perfect team called you.
Yeah.
And if you can remain objective and start trying these things out on your personal life, I'm not saying run your life as a project. I'm saying pick 2 or 3 to work on for 6 months and try it and actually analyze the results, capture the data and think this worked, this didn't. I like this, I didn't like this. And don't give up on it. All of these things, and the 7th edition pulls this out really well. There are a lot of different principles and behaviors and domains that you can pick and choose, and you can tailor for basically any experience in private life as well as your professional life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the things that I learned best in terms of how it is that I approach my work now was as a young boy and an older teen on the farm. When my parents taught me how to do things, and I became much more self-sufficient because they would show me a couple of things and then I would expand on those to do something else. I remember my father was, besides being a farmer, was also a school principal. And I remember him coming home and being shocked in a good way, surprised at how I had accomplished something when he had only shown me a bit of it. But he had taught me how to take that bit and expand it to the greater good. And I think that, just from a different experiences, they don't have to be from the PMBOK, they don't have to be from a leadership book. They can be just trying things out in our personal lives. Yeah,
and again, we're saying the tools and the ways we do the work are good, but it's that mindset that actually is the differentiating factor.
So we've talked a lot today about mindset. We've talked a lot about tailoring. We've talked a little about principles. I think we have enough fodder for many, many, many podcasts to come, Tim.
This lays the foundation. There's a lot of things that we can go into detail, and I expect we will. We may meander a little bit too. If any of people are listening out there and you like this, of course, ring the bell and like us and all that. On top of that, give us your comments and ask us if you want us to speak on any other topic, because after listening to students for so long, I've gotten a lot of different questions, and Merv, your experience for decades has exposed you to every aspect of project management.
Yeah, I only talk about the good things on this on this podcast. If I talk to people about all the times that I got egg on my face from some stupid thing, but as you mentioned, we have to make those mistakes to learn from them and to continue to grow.
Great. So where can we find you, Merv?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. I have a lot of fun on Facebook. I do that just as kind of a personal, here's my personality, but LinkedIn is where I like to kind of explore ideas around the project management and leadership subject matter.
That sounds good. That's actually my preferred method right now. I'm considering turning on a couple other social media, but that's somewhere in the very short future. Otherwise, if you're watching this video for the first time, just seeing us, and you like our character, subscribe, check us out, comment, and we'll comment back. And you can expect us to be here on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. All right. Until next week, let's surprise each other in terms of what we'll be talking about next week.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Merv.
All right. Take it easy.